Hello, good afternoon, good evening, good morning. Said that backwards. Doesn't matter. Whenever you're watching this or listening to it, welcome to Link Up Leaders, your direct link to leaders in supply chain and e-commerce. My name is Lisa Kinski. I'm your producer and co-host, and as always, joined by Francois Jeffrey. Francois, how are you today?
Good. Again, no complaints. Very excited for today's conversation.
I am too. And I'm thrilled that it is Friday and we've just finished our first week of having an episode every single day of the week. It has felt like a marathon. And
was that the first week?
This was the first week of having one every single day of the week. So
that's exciting stuff.
Yes, it's been good. It's been very good. Well, and we're going to end this week on a very, very high note. Today, we have Jake Barnett joining us from Fortunet, calling in from, so everybody else can be as jealous as we are, Rio de Janeiro. So Jake, welcome.
Hello. How you doing?
Good. We're happy to have you here. So let's just
great to be here.
Straight in. So we actually got connected with you through Yael. She was on here discussing IP, patents, trademarks, and everything's kind of with her representing Kabili & Co., but she's also involved with Fortunet, which you are involved with as well. So how did you get to know Yael? How did you make it into this world of e-com and mergers and acquisitions? Just tell us the whole story.
Yeah, appreciate it. Great to be here. So I kind of got into M&A in the e-commerce space a little bit of a roundabout way. My background was more in tech and digital marketing, and I had done a lot with software for e-commerce vendors. So I had done a lot of customer acquisition, lead generation, sales, and so forth. Was looking for a little bit of a career pivot. Met about 2 years ago now one of the early aggregators of Amazon businesses. Just loved the idea of it, loved what I could do for that space with finding deals and helping to analyze those. So I jumped in there on the buy side, done about 15 deals on the buy side over the last 2 years. FBA businesses, everything ranging from $250,000 to $10 million plus. And then about 2 months ago, I decided to join Fortunet, which is on the sell side. So kind of switching teams, got to know Fortunet, got to know Yael and the team actually as a buyer. Was really impressed with how professional they were, with the quality of their deals, also with how tough negotiators they are and how they really are able to boost the value for their clients. So for a few reasons, including that, I kind of decided to switch teams, use what I learned on the buy side to help sellers when they're looking to exit. How do you really push the multiple, push the valuation? So that's a little bit of my journey. Really love Yael and the whole team. Super professional, again, really tough negotiators, but I like to be on that side with the great team. So yeah, it's fantastic. I've been with them about 2 months. Working with sellers who are getting ready to sell, as well as going through the whole transaction process, from building the P&L to creating that kind of narrative of the business, and then working through the buying process and diligence and closing. So I think I'm super fortunate. I get to talk to really successful e-commerce entrepreneurs every day, learn their stories, and I'm just super humble about that. I mean, it's such a cool space and so exciting right now. So
yeah, it's very exciting. And I like what you said about how Yael is like a really great negotiator. She is such a doll, but I don't think that I would want to go like toe to toe with her in any kind of business deal. I would be deeply intimidated.
Yeah, such a sweetheart, but super sharp. She's a lawyer, and she owns the law firm, but also is a co-founder of Fortunet. And I think it's great when people are tough negotiators, but they're nice and you want to do business with them. So, it's not something that leaves a bad taste in your mouth. It's like, yeah, you want to do it again.
Yeah. And she knows her shit. If anybody missed her episode on our show, please go back and listen to it, because you will learn something. You will learn everything. But yeah, well, that's fantastic. So let's go ahead and start teeing off some questions, Francois, because I know you've got them.
Well, I'm more curious a little bit about your background. You've been in this space for the past decade, and you said you were more in the digital marketing space. Was that with e-commerce, or was that just for other types of businesses?
So that was with mostly tech companies, enterprise software. that were often selling to e-commerce or traditional retail. So it was, wasn't e-commerce specific. I did work for one company called Loopit, which was a social commerce app that ended up being purchased by Nanigan. So had some cool experiences in the e-commerce space, but it wasn't e-commerce specific. I'm not a e-commerce operator. I'm always learning about that, and it's something that I could never do, candidly. But so it was more software working in e-commerce, and I just, saw all these trends and, saw the wave of what's happening here on Amazon and elsewhere, and just thought it'd be a good place to be. So a little bit roundabout way of getting here, but I've been specifically doing M&A for e-commerce the last 2 years and learned a ton, and I love doing it.
And now you're fortunate to be with Fortinet. There's
fortunate to be with Fortinet. That's a good one. Yeah.
That's your new slogan.
Yeah.
Well, so how was that? What was that learning process like? I guess when you started to get into M&As, what did you start to learn about that maybe you never really thought about when it comes to e-commerce companies? What did you have to learn about them? Or when you talk to them, what did you have to sort of pick their brains about? I imagine that was a rapid, it seems like a rapid transition from more of that very specific digital marketing space in tech companies to this M&A space.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely a learning curve. On the finance side, on the P&L specifically, learned a lot there about just, what makes for an attractive business, what makes for a business with good fundamentals. It sounds basic now. It sounds basic when I say it, but looking at year-over-year trends, looking at trends by SKU, looking at trends by SKU, by channel, by geography, all those things. When people are buying these businesses, if you're buying a business for 7 or 8 figures, it's not just, hey, this looks good, let's do it. You're spending a lot of time making sure, is it the right business? What are the highlights? What are some of the problems? What's the future trajectory as well? So I look at a lot of that as a learning curve on the technical side of how do you analyze the business, both qualitative and quantitative. So it's not just about the numbers. What's the story? What's the historical look like? What's the current run rate? And then what's the projected, future growth opportunities of the business? So it was a big change. It was tough the first few months, those first few deals that we did, trying to wrap my arms around it. But it's been really interesting. I love learning about these kinds of things. And now after 2 years in Amazon M&A, as weird as it might sound, I'm kind of a veteran in the industry. That's just how nascent things are, especially with Amazon businesses. But yeah, it was a lot of getting into the details of businesses and, understanding just the full 360 view of the business, the good parts about it, the bad parts, and, what do you want to do with those businesses as a buyer over the next 1 to 5 years?
Interesting. I definitely want to hear about the good parts and the bad parts, but I think we should take another step forward, I guess, and learn a little bit more about the process from the buying, because you're in the buying first, from the buying perspective. What are buyers looking for? And maybe it makes more sense to start with the sellers and what sellers should do to set up for buyers.
Yeah, sure. Two sides of the same coin, for sure. And it's interesting, some of the bad things are actually good things. So I've learned about that as well. When we talk about inventory and stuff like that and stock outs, those are often actually positives for the business, as ironic as it might be. It's not positive when you're going through it yourself as an owner, but it's positive from a buy perspective because that's an easy improvement opportunity. So yeah, I think from a buyer perspective, specifically with Amazon, and I've been involved now with 2 aggregators, and now Fortinet is focused on primarily Amazon sellers or Amazon native folks that are doing 70-80% of sales through Amazon and the international channels. There's a few things that I think buyers are really focused on. The top one, which is more of a concept, is just around review moat. So on Amazon, people are looking for products that are well ranked and well reviewed relative to customers. Reviews are one of the only things that you can kind of tangibly buy from one of these businesses. You can buy the assets, you can buy the trademark and all of that, but in the end, reviews are so important for your ranking. Ranking is so important for sales, of course. And we've seen Amazon taking away reviews and making it harder to get reviews and all of that, but it's still a very tangible thing that buyers look for. They want to find a well-reviewed product relative to other directly competing products so they can try to maintain that top position. The thesis is, it's easier to maintain your top spot than it would be to fight with a new product to get up there. So that's one of the, I think, main drivers around the whole wave of aggregators that we've seen come into the space is they're looking for that, digital real estate, Fifth Avenue digital real estate, where you can maintain that top position, defend it, with reviews, with increased spend, with some new product launches that are, child ASINs and things of that nature. So it's kind of one of the top things. And there's other things such as, growth rates, margins. A lot of these buyers look for relatively simple businesses, and that can be through supply chain as well as channels and things like that as well. So a lot of it is just the business fundamentals. Do you have good margins? Are you growing fast year over year? Are you growing in all of your channels? Are all of your SKUs continuing to grow? Things of that nature. But in the end, I think on Amazon, for the aggregators, at least, it comes down to finding that review mode product that, you think you can defend and, use as a base to grow further.
And for some of our audience members who may not be as familiar with the industry, can you give like a quick rundown of what these Amazon aggregators are?
Yeah, sure. It's a bit of a mix between like traditional private equity, kind of micro private equity is one way to look at it, because these are relatively small deals, $1 million, $5 million, much smaller than what most private equity funds would do. So it's a mix of that private equity plus the operational platform. So they're not buying it. They're typically not looking to buy and flip brands. They're looking to buy the brands, bring them into their portfolio, operate them, try to achieve economies of scale in areas such as advertising and supply chain and brand management. And I think you'll hear most of them say they want to be the next Procter & Gamble or Johnson & Johnson of the 21st century. So, digital first, e-commerce first, having a collection of brands. Most of them are looking in a variety of categories that they can use Amazon as a great base and then grow in new and different ways. That could be on Amazon, that could be other marketplaces, could be direct to consumer, as well as brick and mortar, kind of depends. But there's something like about 40 of these aggregators that now are in the business. When I joined the industry 2 years ago, there was something like 3. So it's really exploded. Yeah. It's wild. It happened faster than I ever imagined. And I knew it was going to happen fast because it's such an opportunity. There's something like 40 of these new buyers just looking for mostly Amazon businesses. And they've raised collectively something like $3 billion in capital. So, it's a good time to be an owner of an Amazon business and an e-commerce business. And there's a whole lot of other buyers that are trying to get involved, whether it's private equity or family offices. See a lot of e-commerce sellers that are also looking to do acquisitions to, integrate into their portfolio. But the aggregators are a unique bunch. It's kind of the 21st century Procter & Gamble, and they're bidding up the prices for sellers. So if sellers are listening, then I think that's the most important part of that conversation.
And you said that you knew that the aggregator space was going to grow pretty quickly, but do you think that COVID and all the increased spend in e-commerce helped accelerate that?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, for sure. That accelerated, the timeline by 10 years, probably. I think it was all in motion already. You had some aggregators that raised tremendous amounts of money that were already doing well. But there's just been such a flood of sales going towards e-commerce, as well as just more attention, that it really just accelerated that a lot. It's ironic because, COVID has sucked. I don't think anybody's liked COVID, but there's been a lot of, personally, I've not enjoyed it and I'm looking forward to moving on. But from an e-commerce perspective, a lot of businesses have done very well. Some, category dependent have not, but it's It's helped a lot of people on e-commerce, and it's definitely shifted a lot of the focus with aggregators. And, every week there's a new one popping up and raising another 100 million or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I've cut you off twice now. Please go.
No. I was just going to say, to define the other side, when you say sellers, we're talking about private label brands, right? Not retail arbitrage or I guess some of the wholesalers in that space.
Yeah, that's correct. Most people are focused on private label brands. There's not that much interest in that, the reseller or the wholesale side. Yeah, it's really private label that all the aggregators are going after. And I think a few reasons for that, some of it might be around margin or just sustainability. But yeah, that's the focus. It's all about the private label.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And when these aggregators are bringing on or acquiring new Amazon private label businesses, obviously they want to look to see if they have like a strong supply chain in place. And I'm just curious, I'm sure you have insight into this. When they purchase those, are they keeping the supply chain in place that the original, I'm going to fudge up this question, but like, so like if you're an aggregator, Jake, and Francois has a private label that you want to purchase, and he has a really strong relationship with the supplier and a really solid supply chain in place, when you purchase that, are you maintaining his existing relationships and saying, we already like what you're doing, we're just going to expand on things through like the digital marketing and stuff like that? Or are you saying, we like the business, but our supplier can do it better, so we're going to move all this work over here?
No, I think buyers are overall with the business, they're looking to maintain continuity and build upon what the owner has started with and the foundation that they've created. Supply chain, none of it works without the supply chain. So that's definitely one of the most valuable components of these businesses. When you talk about things that you can buy, a buyer is buying the relationship with the seller and those terms that you've negotiated. They might look to improve on that. They might look to negotiate, better pricing, and they might have some more expertise around that. They might look at diversifying the supply chain. Those things can be tough to do, to diversify a supply chain when you're doing $1 or $5 million annual sales. It's a lot of money, but at the same time, how do you have 3 suppliers with different MOQs and all of that? You just don't often have the capacity or the capability to arrange that. So they might look to improve the supply chain. They might look to diversify it. One of the things is these aggregators are going after such a wide swath of businesses and categories that they might not have that much overlap actually between their different brands. So to try and consolidate that might be more difficult. Maybe they can consolidate around a 3PL, things of that nature, but they're very much looking for strong relationships with suppliers that they can continue on, perhaps improve upon. But yeah, if it's not a good supplier relationship, that can actually, mess up the deal or really take away on the value.
So what are some other things that could stop a deal from going through?
Sure. A big one is around IP. You probably talked with Yao about some of this stuff. I've seen some deals fall apart because trademarks were not, actually registered as they were supposed to be. You can't really buy the business without the trademark. That can be one that's just a glaring, hey, get this fixed if it's not set up. When you actually get into the process of selling the business, if you see a sudden drop in sales or perhaps some suspensions during that sales process, that can become a really big red flag and an issue for sellers. Right as you're looking to close, your top seller gets suspended. That's tough. But there's lots of challenges with businesses that happen. Even fast growing, healthy businesses have challenges. So when you're looking to sell it, most of those things are not going to be red flags or, a deal breaker if you tell the story in the right way. So you have to be transparent with buyers and talk to them about the difficulties. And a lot of those things they'll actually look at as pros, because maybe with their operational expertise, they can solve that and the business will become stronger. But I think, unless the business is really declining, unless you have some major issues with suspensions or legal, if you have an active lawsuit, that can be very difficult as well. But even with challenging circumstances, if you tell the story in the right way and you're transparent with buyers, with today's market, if you're still growing and you still have good margins, you can sell the business. So it's more about, taking a little bit longer term perspective when you have challenges, how do you resolve them or perhaps get a path to resolving them?
And what does, because I know you've mentioned stories a few times, what does the story sort of consist of? And I know that could vary from case scenario to case scenario, but overall, should a seller have a story from like when they first started the business and how they reached out to suppliers? And I guess what level of detail do they have to include in that when they're sort of pitching this to buyers?
Yeah, sure. I think most of it's focused around first is the last 12 months and then, the 12 months before that. So 24 months is really what the buyers care about. There's some businesses that are so new and growing so fast that they don't even have that time frame. But really the idea is around the last 24 months. How have you continued to grow your products? It's a combination of both past growth and how you explain that, and then also total addressable market and understanding what is the path to future growth. Sometimes if you're the top seller and you're so dominant, you capture 80% of sales, you've grown so fast year over year, you might not have a good story about, hey, where is the future growth going to come from? So it's really, I think in terms of time frame, about 2 years that buyers look at, and it's just understanding, how did you get to this place? People want to understand that what you've done is legitimate, that you haven't used, black hat techniques, of course, all that kind of stuff. But, really it's about what's the story for the brand as a whole? What's the story for individual SKUs and their trajectory over time? And most importantly, what is the future opportunity for the buyer? Where is the low hanging fruit? Is it international expansion through Amazon? Is it going into Walmart.com? Are there efficiencies in supply chain that you can do? Can you lower your COGS? Things of that nature. So it's, really about merging the past with the future. And it's real, and its core, you want to give a story to the buyer that's easily ingestible, that they can fall in love with the business just from reading a presentation, and spark that interest before they even, look at the P&L, before they talk with the owner and all of that.
And how do these
Go.
I was going to say, how do these acquisitions usually, how do the buyer and seller usually find each other? Is there like a site where it's like, I'm looking to sell my Amazon business and these aggregators will be looking for them there? Or is it just, we've seen this brand really grow, let's reach out to them and see if they're interested in selling?
Yeah, it's a combination. So of course, Fortinet, we're an investment bank and we're happy to, we help sellers sell their businesses. So we have relationships with a big network of buyers, all of the aggregators, as well as others. And, we will bring them deals directly and act as the, seller's agent, essentially sitting on their side of the table, helping them go through the process. There are also a lot of brokers in the space that, might take an approach of, hey, list it on a website and blast it out to their email list and see what comes back. There are definitely a lot of buyers that are going direct to sellers. That was my job the last year and a half, actually, was going out, finding deals, trying to get that direct relationship. That's one option for buyers. They like that generally because when it's not a competitive auction of the business, generally there's going to be lower prices. So that's kind of why buyers do want to go direct. So it's both price, but it's also the amount of inventory in the market. They want to do a lot of deals. There's 40 buyers, active aggregators. They all want to do 100 deals in the next 2 or 3 years. So they're looking everywhere, whether it's through folks like Fortinet, whether it's brokers, whether it's direct, whether it's somebody who sold their business, had a good experience and refers them somebody. So they're hunting for deals all over. It's really kind of a feeding frenzy right now.
Gotcha. And for the audio only audience, Fortinet is spelled Fortunet.
Yes,
if you're interested in checking them out, I'm also going to plug them in the description of the audio and the video. Okay, Francois, go ahead.
Well, before any of that even happened, my question before that was, do you just sort of sit there looking through pitch decks all day? Is that something that a lot of Amazon sellers even have experience with putting together, or is that something that you help them put together?
It's something Fortinet we definitely help do. And that's when we talk about creating a narrative around the business. A lot of that is in this we could do a pretty extensive one, 40 to 60 slide presentation, pitch deck on the business, everything from, breakdown of the SKUs like we've talked about to competitive analysis, market analysis, all of that. Most sellers are so busy running their own businesses that they don't have the time to create that type of material. Right. The most attractive businesses are the ones that are growing the fastest, which are the hardest to, manage because they're just scaling up so quickly. Inventory supply chain is such a huge challenge there and part of that as well. But that's something Fortinet helps with. I've seen sellers go out and create those on their own to pitch directly to buyers. And, it's certainly important to have something there. We spend a lot of time on that because we know how valuable it is. But yeah, most sellers, they don't even have a P&L ready to go, which is fine too. That's understandable. It's kind of like when you're looking to hire somebody, you always want to hire somebody that already has a job and not somebody that is unemployed. And it's like buyers want to find the people that are so busy because they're scaling so quickly that they don't have all those things prepared and ready to go. But that's not so complicated. The hard of putting that together, the harder part is crafting the narrative.
I don't know why the first thing that came to my mind when you said pitch deck, Francois, was Elle Wood's audition tape for Harvard Law in Legally Blonde. I don't know why that was. Is that going over both your heads? Do you know what I'm saying?
I remember the movie, of course.
I remember the movie, but I don't remember the scene.
Oh, okay.
I can remember it now. Yeah. That's a good one.
That's the first thing that came to my mind.
But my next question after that was also, what can sellers do to, I guess, start preparing, especially when it is a seller that does start to grow rapidly? Is there anything that they should really start to focus on early on to build a solid foundation for potential exit?
Yeah, sure. A few things. Getting IP locked down, of course, that's, a relatively straightforward thing, but it's something I've seen a lot of sellers just neglect because they haven't had the time or whatever. A lot of it depends on your time frame. So when you have, 6 or 12 or 18 months before you want to look at a sale, there's a lot of other things that you can do to, enhance that intrinsic value of the brand. Things that we look at Fortinet are things such as PPC spend to make sure that's optimized for profit. If you have employees, understanding that those expenses are going to be allocated correctly and make sure that your end profit number is as big as possible. That's what it comes down to. Because when you have a valuation, it's a two-part equation. You have your profit number and you have your multiple. You can only mess with those two sides of it. So we look at things such as, how do you make sure that your PPC spend is optimized? We have one client who we looked at it and we were able to do some tweaks, suggest some tweaks that brought about 7 or 8% additional margin. That was something like $200,000 additional profit over the next 12 months. And when you sell at a 5x multiple, that turns into $1 million. So it can really add up. Most sellers, they're focused on growth. They're focused on not going out of stock, gaining market share, things of that nature. It's a little bit like the life cycle of launching a product. When you first launch a product, you're typically not looking to make it profitable right away. There's a similar life cycle for your brand when you are looking to sell it. You need to take, especially those last 12 months, and optimize for profit as much as you can to make that profit base as big as you can when you get there.
And then how important, I guess, what sort of foundation do they have to lay down in supply chain? Because it is, being realistic about it, there is no PPC without a solid supply chain. If you don't have inventory, you have nothing to sell, right? What can a seller do, or what would you suggest they put together to sort of make it simple for buyers to understand their supply chain?
Yeah, I think, first of all, trying to simplify the supply chain. So, sometimes I've seen deals which are smaller deals where you have 15 suppliers, and maybe there's reasons that you did that as a seller, but that just might make it more complicated as the business grows. And if you look at a buyer who's potentially going to do 100 acquisitions, if they have each of those 100 acquisitions has 15 suppliers, that can soon create a lot of complexity for their business. So, first of all, how can you simplify those relationships, perhaps consolidate, if it makes sense from a business perspective as well? How do you get those terms in writing, and how do you negotiate more?
I'm sorry, what do you mean by consolidate when it comes to supply chain?
So for example, I saw one deal where somebody was sourcing all the different components for their bottles. It was a skincare brand, and they were sourcing all the different components from their bottles and the pumps and everything, in addition to the actual product. And they were saving some money there, but it really made for a very complex supply chain. And that in the end is a business decision. But, you have to weigh, is the complexity worth the amount that you're saving in that particular situation? So that was one which was really tough to just digest as a buyer, because, it's just a lot of SKUs, a lot of suppliers, maintaining that. There's just more room for error when it's more complex. So you're going to maybe you save some money in that example, but it might actually create more value for the brand in the long term if, you can perhaps get competitive pricing while bringing some of that, together.
Okay.
Does that make more sense?
And I'm sorry to cut you off. When I thought you meant like a supplier that's producing these bottles. And you also have another SKU that's producing these mugs. And I was like, but I understand maybe you could, components of the product itself. That makes a lot more sense.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to cut you off. You can continue if you remember where you left off.
I don't remember. No.
Well, we were talking supply chain. We were talking consolidation of the different SKUs.
IPI is a big one, right? Buyers are looking a lot at that. That's, I've seen some deals where you had a really kind of tough IPI score, and that makes it difficult for the buyer to kind of digest the business and start building up inventory. Inventory is, of course, one of these perennial challenges for a lot of sellers. So, when you digest a brand as a buyer and the IPI score is really not good, that can make it very challenging. So IPI is one of those things where I think from a supply chain perspective, of course, on Amazon, how do you improve that? Because it's going to add a lot to the value as well. It's not going to be as big of a factor as growth or profit margins, things like that. But, IPI is big. I think we've, seen a lot of people move to 3PLs for those reasons, and some of the inbounding restrictions and so forth. But I've seen that become more of a focus area for a lot of buyers and I think sellers as well.
And then how much do buyers dissect communications and relationships with suppliers? I guess, how granular does a seller have to get into, hey, this is how I'm interacting with my supplier. I'm not talking to the sales rep. I know the owner and I visited a certain amount of times. How granular do they have to get with those supplier stories as well?
Sure. It probably depends a little bit on the buyer. I think some more than others. Generally, the supplier part of it is kind of one of the last legs of the deal. So you go through maybe a 4 or 6 week diligence process. Buyers start with financials and understanding the brand and where you came from, all of that. One of the last things that buyers are going to typically look at are the suppliers. That's not because it's not important. That's because the supplier relationship is so important and proprietary to the seller. Most sellers don't want to reveal that information until they know the deal, they're very confident that the deal is going to go through. So, typically they want to do an interview with the supplier and, perhaps have a questionnaire that they're going to send to them. I don't think, they want to see that there's a good relationship, but I don't think knowing the owner is necessarily going to be, a huge plus there. It's more about, is this a stable relationship? Is the supplier reputable and, going to be able to provide the service needed going forward, and making sure that all checks out. So for sure, they're going to look at, things like invoices, and all of that. That's to help reconcile the profits of the business as well. They're going to want to see any agreements that you might have in place with suppliers. But that is one of the kind of last things, because it's one of those proprietary parts of the business. Sellers don't want to reveal until it's really necessary. And it is important, but a lot of it is just, hey, does it check out? Does it look good? Okay, let's do it.
And then is that also the same time that a buyer would sort of analyze operational inefficiencies when it comes to if a seller is, maybe they ship too many LCLs when they could consolidate all of
Yeah.
their various suppliers and ship an FCL, and then utilize the 3PL. At what stage does a buyer start to look for these inefficiencies, and at what information do the sellers need to have prepared early on, or I guess some sort of tracking? Or I've spoken to a few sellers that they have no paperwork on a lot of their stuff.
Understand
and
it.
so
Yeah.
and so that's why I'm asking, what do they have to have prepared for buyers, and what are buyers looking for in that?
Yeah, buyers will start looking at that kind of from the beginning, before any letter of intent or LOI is signed. Buyers are going to start looking at the business from a high level financial perspective, market perspective, the review moat, all of that. So, buyers are going to try to look for inefficiencies. They're going to try and look for some of these challenges that the seller might have had, because they look at that as a easy, quote unquote, easy improvement opportunity, especially with logistics, because it's a lot easier. Maybe saying this, it's not, but it seems easier to perhaps as a large buyer who's well funded to solve the inventory problem, to solve the 3PL problem, than it is to get a product to go from 0 to 1 million in sales in a year. So those are the types of synergies they look for as these large professional buyers with big operations teams and full-time logistics people, is they say, okay, we can solve these problems. We know how to do it. We have the playbook. So they start looking at it, from the initial part of the business, in particular, things such as stockouts, which a lot of people have had challenges with over the last year. Understandable, with all the supply chain issues combined with massive spikes in demand, seen a lot of stockouts. Buyers kind of salivate over those things because they just say, okay, we're not going to run out of stock in the next year. They were out of stock a month. We'll just add an extra month of sales and profit to the bottom line just from doing that. And they don't have to worry as much about losing rank when it does happen. So those are some of the, what buyers consider easy improvements to the business from a supply chain perspective. Certainly, perhaps consolidating shipments, getting better pricing from, higher orders, things like that as well. 3PL, it seems so critical. You guys probably know more about this than me, but it seems so critical now for brands, is you have, especially up around Amazon, you have to have a 3PL. Saw a lot of folks that had to switch over from FBA to FBM, and that saved them back in March and April. So buyers start looking at that right away to try to identify those inefficiencies. It's kind of the whole concept of the aggregator model is, finding these owner operator businesses that are inefficient but have done something amazing, take that amazing thing and make it more efficient, and keep growing the business.
So let's say, sorry, I'm going to skip a little forward in the process. So let's say they've checked everything out. They love what they see with the business. They go on ahead and buy it. How does that change of ownership in the inventory go? If they have a bunch of inventory sitting in a 3PL, or perhaps they do have unlimited storage with FBA and there's tons of inventory sitting in FBA, how does that work out? Do they and does it even matter? Or do they just see the brand and they're like, okay, it's the same brand, doesn't matter? How does that work?
Yeah, good question. So, from the business sale part of it, from the valuation process, inventory is typically actually taken in addition to the valuation at landed COGS. So for example, if you sell a business for $1 million and you have $100,000 in inventory at your landed cost, that will be paid in addition to a valuation. So it's almost a way where, a lot of people put a lot of their profits back into the business in inventory, and it's a way to kind of unlock some more of that. Buyers might look at that differently. Some might pay it up front. Some might offer to pay it up front at a discount. Some might take it on consignment. There's different ways that you can negotiate that, and it depends on your situation. So that's how it's treated from a financial perspective. And
before we move on, what does landed cost mean?
Yeah, so that's your cost of, getting it to your warehouse in the US, everything from, the cost of producing it to the freight and all of that.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Continue.
So that's your actual cost, to get it over into the warehouse if you have a 3PL or if you ship directly to Amazon.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And, like I mentioned earlier, the buyers are looking for continuity. So, they might look at consolidating on the 3PL side, for example. But when it comes to the inventory that's in Amazon, as well as your Amazon account, buyers are purchasing that account. So they want to maintain that. They will, you will get paid for that inventory at cost, but they're going to look to, continue that relationship definitely for the short term, perhaps consolidate on the 3PL in the medium term. But they really want to make sure, and I've seen this become an issue, that in that first 1 to 3 months after the close, you don't go out of stock, that you really just kind of maintain the business as is. So that doesn't really change much in the kind of immediate future after the close.
Gotcha. How long does the full process of an acquisition usually take?
That was my question.
Good question. One of my favorites. Yeah. So it can take, anywhere from 6-12 months plus, if you really want to think about, preparing your business for sale and how do you optimize the business for sale. When you look at actually saying, hey, I'm ready, that's a very personal choice as well. You say, I'm ready to go. I want to sell the business right now. It usually takes total, maybe 3 or 4 months. You can always sell it faster if you wanted to. At Fortinet, we think take your time on this because, it's often a once in a lifetime type of event, or going to be one of your largest, financial transactions of your life to date, or perhaps in the future. At Fortinet, we spend about a month really digging into the numbers, building the P&L. We call it a smart P&L, where we look for add backs such as, did you spend a lot of money on air freight versus sea freight? And let's add that back to the P&L. Once the business is ready to sell, you start marketing it. That's typically about a month or 2 process where you're going to go out and shop the deal around. We conduct an auction where, it's hyper competitive, and just make sure that buyers are bidding against each other, and that, you're going to reach that top valuation. But once you have an offer and you sign the LOI, it's typically from there about 45 days diligence process, where the buyers go in, they look at everything from supply chain, financials, advertising, et cetera. And then there's usually about a week or 2 of legal. So if you have like a buyer in hand and you're ready to go, you're looking at probably 6 weeks to 2 months. But there's of course time it takes to find the right buyer, to negotiate the terms and all of that.
And what does LOI stand for?
LOI, sorry, letter of intent. We have so many of these like 3-letter acronyms: LCL, IPI.
Yes. The industry is full of them, and they're all like 3 letters, like you said. So that's actually that seems like a quicker process than what I think I would have imagined, like 3 or 4 months. So is it kind of the same as like when you sell a house, that you're working, unless you're doing like from like sell by owner, if you're working like with Fortinet to sell your business, do you have to go through Fortinet, or can you talk to the potential buyer? Is it like where you can't talk to the buyer and seller if you guys are both using realtors? You have to go through your realtor only?
So most buyers, even if they're going with if a seller's going with Fortinet, buyers are still going to want to have a conversation with, or multiple conversations with, the owner of the business before they, proceed with the transaction.
Got it. And that's allowed. That's totally cool.
That's allowed. We play the role of, kind of coach and guide, where, we want to control those conversations. The buyers are very savvy, a lot of finance, private equity consultants that have gotten into the industry. Sellers are really good at doing what they've done. They probably haven't sold a business before. Maybe they sold one and that's it. So we want to be there to, have their back and guide them. It's also can be very time consuming. We market deals to often hundreds of potential buyers. If you want to talk to 20 or 30 of those, that becomes almost a full-time job. So, we look at part of it as, protecting the seller in terms of, being there to have your back, to make sure you're not taken advantage of during the diligence process or prior to that. You might have some buyers that are kind of on fishing expeditions. Maybe they're looking at other competitive products, or they own a competitive product. We want to watch out for those types of things. And at the same time, a lot of it is just, your own time. So we will talk to buyers on behalf of the seller, have those initial conversations, start soliciting offers, just to at least, take some of that burden off. But yeah, I don't think any buyers are going out and doing these deals without actually talking to them. But without talking to the seller. But yeah, we facilitate the whole process.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And then is the seller going to stick? I know you said that they typically stick with it after, you know, the sale has been made because the buyer wants to keep things flowing. Is it an option for the seller to just wash their hands and walk away though? Or is there that the buyer can be like, well, if you don't deliver on certain duties or if it doesn't deliver on certain returns on investments, that you know, I'm going to get my money back.
Yeah. It's that's fairly flexible, and there's a lot of different situations. It depends a lot on the seller and what they want to do. I would say that the default or the most common is something like a 1 to 3 month transition period. So it's actually pretty short as well. So maybe you're going to take 2, 3, 4 months to sell the business. You'll be there for 1 to 3 months to do the handoff, you know, educate the buyer on the intricacies of the business. A lot of buyers prefer that. I'd say a lot of sellers definitely prefer it. A lot of the folks that I work with are just launching a new brand. They're busy. That's why they're selling a fast growing business, is because they have other priorities. So, you know, maybe they don't want to do a year or a 2-year engagement. There are a lot of new buyers that might see value in having someone on longer term that maybe don't have that Amazon or e-commerce expertise, and they might be willing to perhaps pay more to keep the owner on for a longer term. But it's generally something around 1 to 3 months. It's usually straightforward. It doesn't take a ton of time. They want that. They also want a relationship with the seller where if someone comes up in 6 months or 12 months, you know, they can make a call. Something happens with the supplier, whatever it might be, that they can get some help out of it. And they look at incentivizing sellers through things like earnouts or performance payments. And that's part of the reason they want to do that. But it's generally, you know, fairly straightforward, 1 to 3 months, and you're kind of good to go.
And can you explain what an earnout and performance payment is? Yeah,
sure. So when we look at evaluation, there's different parts of that deal, the deal structure. You know, let's take a $1 million example of a sale. The business is worth $1 million. Maybe it's doing $200,000 a year profit, 250. It gets a 4 or 5x multiple. It's $1 million. That's not necessarily $1 million cash at close. It might be, you can negotiate that, but buyers often want to put in what's called an earnout or a performance payment where some of that $1 million, maybe 10% or 20%, is going to be based on future performance. So that might be in the next 12 months or 24 months after the purchase, that they will share a certain amount of profits with you, the seller, going forward. So if it's a $200,000 earnout, maybe you have $100,000 in the first year. That's a profit share, and then $100,000 in the second year. There's a lot of different ways to skin that cat. You have sometimes you have stability payments where, you know, a buyer might give you an extra portion of cash once you reach something like 80% of your last 12 months sales. So it's always based around the idea of how do you align incentives going forward? How do you put a little bit more skin in the game from the seller? That shows a lot of value to buyers, and it's a way to kind of share that upside as well. You can often stretch your valuation if you're willing to let some of that ride on an earnout or a performance payment. At the same time, I meet very few sellers that like the idea of earnouts or want to do an earnout, especially when they're stepping out of the business and they're not operating it. So, you know, it depends on, you know, your level of risk and what you're looking for as a seller. But, you know, I often tell sellers that, you know, hey, it's such a hot seller's market. I know you hate the idea of an earnout, but if you get to where you want to be from the cash portion of the deal, and then the seller wants to put an earnout on top of it, you know, that's not really any risk from your standpoint. You could perhaps have some upside. You got what you want in cash, go with it. But some people just don't want to do an earnout. I understand it. But most buyers are looking to have that as part of the deal.
And throughout the conversation, you've said, like, you know, when somebody's looking to buy a brand or when the brand owner is doing this, do you generally find that when the buyers are purchasing a private label brand that they're purchasing all of the products within a brand, or do they sometimes just come to a company and say, like, we just want this one product that you have? Will they parse it off, or is it like an all or nothing type thing?
It's usually all or nothing. I think you see some of these kind of carve outs occasionally. It becomes a little more complicated with that if you're operating under like the same Amazon store and, you're purchasing the trademark, and then, how are you going to buy one or two or several products and leave several products? So that can be more difficult. But if it's perhaps a different brand under the same Seller Central account, a different Amazon store, different trademark, but you're just selling multiple products in your account, that can be possible as well. And people look at that. But typically they're looking to purchase, all of the ASINs, all of the SKUs. They might look at shutting some of those down. They might look at launching new ones. They're also, buyers are going to look at purchasing all of your channels. So not just Amazon. They're going to look at Shopify. They're going to look at Walmart.com. They want to purchase everything. You're not going to generally continue selling any of the products anywhere after the deal.
And is there any kind of like non-compete with these deals? So like if I sell you my skincare company, I don't know, and you buy it, then can I then create a competitive skincare company? Or is there a rule against that?
Usually not. Usually you can't. Okay. Most buyers want a non-compete. That's something you can negotiate as well. We really push for a non-compete on directly competitive products. A lot of times it might be on like a use case. So, there might be different ways to go about solving a problem. And that problem might be where the non-compete is based on. But certainly, it's not going to happen at a category level. Health and beauty, that's a huge category. If you sell a certain type of sunscreen, maybe you can't sell sunscreen anymore, but you can sell, a face mask, something like that. That's important because, most sellers are looking to continue operating in areas that they know. Fine if you want to give 2 or 3 years as a non-compete on those products directly, but carving out an entire category isn't usually fair for the seller.
Gotcha.
What about the supplier?
Supplier, that's a good question. I don't know if I've had that question come up before where they asked about a non-compete with the supplier. Yeah, maybe the buyers haven't thought of that actually. At least from any of the deals that I've done, I haven't seen it where that became an issue, but I would, I'm gonna have to defer on that one. I'll have to go ask Al.
Well, I'm glad I was able to stump you today.
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah. I'm sure people thought about it. I just need to. I'll go ask the boss.
Yeah. No, and the only reason I think about that is because suppliers can be great assets, sometimes just as great as assets as the product itself, because they can continue innovating. They typically have, if you're working with a good supplier, they probably have a strong R&D team. And you can, pivot maybe outside of that category and skirmish out of that non-compete, but that's besides the point.
Good question.
Well, one question I did have also is, when it comes to virtual assistants, we've had a few guests on here that have talked about virtual assistants within their organization. We're having Carlos Alvarez on, for example, next week, and he has something like over 200 virtual assistants part of his organization. I don't imagine that's for one specific brand. But when a brand does incorporate VAs into their system, into their organizational structure, how does that transition over to the new buyers, and how do they weigh these? I don't know if there would be considered risks, but they are more of those that global team.
Sure. Yeah. Good question. That depends a lot on the buyer and kind of where their team is. Sometimes they might want to maintain that continuity. They might want to get the owner as well as any VAs or other employees locked into a year or two contract to, try to build up their own expertise. A lot of times the buyers already have those systems in place. And most of the tasks that are being done by the VAs, they have that capacity and capability in-house already. So it is on a kind of a case-by-case basis. Sometimes the VAs might come with the business. The other employees, as well might. Other times they don't want to. The seller might want to keep them for their next business. That's fine too. So it's a bit of flexibility there. And, what we've seen is that's really important on that question is making sure that you're accounting for the costs correctly. So we have a lot of clients that have multiple brands, maybe they're not allocating those expenses correctly. I think I mentioned it earlier. We had a situation where somebody wasn't, they had like 9 employees They didn't allocate it correctly. We had them narrow that down to basically 2 that were really working on it full time, lowered the costs by something like $100,000 a year. That turned into an additional $500,000 at exit. So those, when you are operating multiple brands with a big team, those are some considerations that you want to have. But really at the core of your question is, I'd say most of the time buyers are not looking for that. It might be an added benefit. Some, it might be a requirement.
Wow. And I can't believe it, but we're at 55 minutes.
Yeah,
this has gone by so fast.
So fun.
And I
fun.
feel like there's so much more that goes into
There is. That's why I mentioned the time, because I know if I don't stop you now.
But
I love these conversations.
I mean, it's an interesting conversation to have, specifically in this space, where I couldn't wrap my head around it, because I personally thought that an Amazon business that's solely an Amazon business is extremely risky, particularly those that only use things like FBA. Obviously, that things have grown out of that. There's very successful 8-9 figure sellers out there, and that's why it's the rise of the rise of M&As. But
one of the cool things, just sorry to interrupt, but on that point, I think one of the reasons it's less risky for the aggregators specifically is they get that type of diversification through multiple acquisitions. So I get the question a lot: what's more valuable for a buyer, a 5 SKU business or a 500 SKU business? I think 2 or 3 years ago, from an M&A perspective, it might have been the 500 SKU business. You have your risk spread out, all of that. But how these buyers now, they are doing 100 acquisitions over the next couple of years. They're going to diversify their risk through, multiple of those. They'd rather have a bunch of heroes with the risk on each of those and then spread it out through their acquisitions. So that's just kind of how that particular point's looked at.
Well, I was measuring risk more as, these businesses don't own their customers most of the time. If they're Amazon specific, right? Amazon owns these customers. They own the process of delivery to the customers. They own how many reviews. I've been hearing about reviews just being taken away. Hundreds of reviews from very successful listings just being taken away like that. And, whatever Amazon brings next to the table, maybe they change their algorithm where you're not ranking as high as you are. And that's where I'm sort of presenting my risk from. Not so much the number of SKUs,
Good point.
but more so that, which is a whole nother conversation to have.
You've got the platform risk, right? Like, it reminds me of 2008, 2009 with Google. Ton of successful businesses, advertisers, that they changed the algorithm, and overnight their business went down 80%. Amazon's a double-edged sword, right? They bring you the customers, they make it easy. And then, they control your destiny. I think that's why more and more folks are looking at going multi-channel. Walmart, Etsy, Wayfair, depends on the category. Everybody wants to get in on Shopify because there is that platform risk.
Absolutely. Yeah. All right. Well, gentlemen, fantastic conversation. Jake, why don't you go ahead and take a moment to plug Fortunet and let folks know where they can get a hold of you if they have any questions about what we discussed today, or if they're interested in selling their business.
Yeah, sure. So Fortunet, I met them on the buy side, really the top of the game when it comes to helping sellers maximize their outcome. If you're considering selling your business, or if you're up to do it right now, we'd love to have a conversation. Jake@fortunet.net, or reach out to us on our website. We'd just love to talk to you about it. What are your goals? What do you want to achieve? And how can we help contribute to that? So I think we're really the top of the game. We're achieving the highest multiples in the industry. And we'd love to work with you if you're interested.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you, Jake, again so much for coming on the show. And if you guys like this episode, please be sure to like, subscribe, and share out with your network. If you or somebody you know would be a great guest for the show, let us know and reach out to Lisa@Noviland.com. And otherwise, we'll see everybody next week on Monday when we go live with Carlos Alvarez with Wizards of Ecom. Thank you, gentlemen. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.